Before we took the break, we're talking about having the opportunity to tell a story, but maybe not using the platform that we have to also protect ourselves. Duncan, you were in an area which was viewed as a volatile area, just, you know, this 26th elections, where there was a lot of resistance from protesters. And maybe give us your experience and possibly what precautions we need to take. Because at the end of the day, yes, you're there to tell a story, but at the end of the day, you need to be alive to tell that story. You need to protect yourself as well. And the fact that you are telling a true story, you may have to take precautions that protect you.
Yes, and I'm glad to be privileged to be on the panel with somebody who taught me basics of journalism. And among other things that you are taught, respecting other people's culture, religion, the religious affiliations and all that. So I'm not saying that there's a specific culture that is suited for specific persons, but you have to understand, you have to be alive to the environment within which you're operating or executing your duties. So in areas like Nyanza, you go there, these are people who are agitated, people who are, I think it's a high voltage political environment. So you need to be careful at the manner in which you are doing your reportage, even the manner in which you pick their minds, even and the way you put them across, because in this era of live coverage, it's real time. You are at one point, you say something, by the time you are hopping to another constituency, you reach there and they tell you that we've seen what you've said, or we've seen the other part of the country and we want to make a statement, we want to correct. So you can imagine the day of 26th of October, there's an area where there was, you can say, total lockdown. Nothing was moving, nothing was getting underway. Whereas the other part of the country, it was business as usual, people are voting. So they are monitoring. So in such an environment, you cannot go and try to condemn them as why are they going against the grain. You have to understand, these are the people that they listen to their leaders religiously. I think they view their political leaders almost as a small god. So when you go there, you need to understand that they are practicing what you can call defiance. So you cannot go there and condemn them and say, today this is what is supposed to be happening, you people what you're doing is wrong, because they are purely doing or I think
what they think is right,
carrying forward
and
what
you're there to
tell
a story,
yes,
not to correct it.
So you really have to have that balance, in as much as you need to be factual, but you also have to be cognizant of the environment in which you are actually.
Julie, does that compromise the quality of the story and what story we're telling, given the fact that now you have to be very careful as you navigate in some of those areas, and like Duncan mentions, you need to be aware of the dynamics that are working in that particular environment?
Yes, especially at the times that, in recent times, the things we've been seeing, people are very passionate about their political positions. So you have to be very careful about how you communicate with them, because it could explode in your face. At the same time, I think we've lost some respect as a press. I think some people don't see us as being objective or neutral, as people always demand of us, or see us as taking one side or the other side. So I think perhaps we need to rebuild our credibility and our reputation, so that when you say something, people see it as being the facts and not as being on one side or the other. Not to accuse you, Hamba, in any manner whatsoever. I'm just saying as a general, the industry has taken very many hits. Therefore, when you go, depending on where you are never ever seen to be having taken a neutral position, which I'm not saying is correct, because there's also truth. But I think we just need to rebuild our reputation and let people know that what we're doing is actually telling a story and giving them information, and not necessarily trying to skew the narrative.
Okay. Yeah. Victor, best practice when it comes to volatile environments, and possibly what journalists need to be aware of before we go to electioneering coverage, which I'd like us to touch on before we wind up.
Thank you. Duncan, you reminded me. Duncan was my student in class some years back, and is a friend. Now, quickly, while the law protects you, and we have quoted all the laws that exist that protect press freedom and journalists while they're working, which we demand that must be respected by all. People must respect these laws, and action should be taken. but we also have an individual responsibility as journalists and as individuals. It's what Duncan was referring to, moral intelligence. When you go to work, are you aware of yourself, the self-awareness in a situation that I'm going to report, for example, in a volatile, and it might not be politics. I know of cases, Gilbert Wandera, who was beaten in the stadium, Nyayo Stadium, during a Gor Mahia FC Leopards football. I know a standard photographer, Elvis Ogina, who has been harassed many times in clubs when he's taking photos for the Palsy. So it's not just politics. We have seen I've known journalists who have harassed, who report on business, who went to cover a story on oil in Turkana. So it's not limited to politics alone. Right. But we need to, as journalists, to also understand, like Duncan said, the environment in which you're operating in. I've seen sometimes some of us lose the sense of the environment, and you want to do a voiceover or a story within a crowd. Now, within that crowd, as you excite them, they know the TVs, the cameras are watching them. They're already pickpocketing you. I know journalist Shikolia, who was roughed out and lost his personal things and some. So we need also to understand, keep a distance, do work, but be aware of the environment, do a quick assessment, to understand what are the prevailing, and I've talked about this sometimes, though not referring to Danga, but the issue of parachute journalists. Sometimes you are parachuted in a situation and put in a Lamu where you have not been operating, and sometimes you don't understand the local. So it's always very important for the journalists who have visited Lamu to liaise with the local correspondents there, so that you get a basic of what the environment is. In Migori, I kept on sending KTN, why is Ndolo exposed? I mean, I have SMSs. Where is that guy exposed? I mean, much as it goes. Because as the situation continues, it was going to happen. And that was, we were predicting that. Because, I mean, these crowds are seeing, and their leaders are telling them, it is this TV station which is doing this and this and this. So there's also a lot of pressure on journalists to understand the environment. Like Duncan said, there's no story worth your life. We want to read the stories, but be safe yourself.
Be alive to tell the story.
Security will be provided by government and others, but safety will be provided by yourself.
It's yours. Duncan, how important is it for journalists to especially be operating in a terrain where they are familiar? And I say this especially now when it comes to issues like when it's a political season, which we are in. If you, for instance, send a journalist to operate in Nyeri because of maybe constraints of staff, send him to Kisumu, for example, an environment where, one, they're not very conversant, they're maybe not even, they don't understand the language fully. How important is it for you to be adaptive to the environment?
Well, if you have, I think, facts, be factual, get facts, and then make sure that your currency is truth. If you need to be biased towards truth. At least that one will save you. I know in areas, you walk in there and people they are telling you that we have an issue with you, but you, at least, your work speaks for yourself. So already, that is something that is an insurance that you have. And that is why it makes it easier for many people to easily operate within very difficult and different environments, because the moment you appear there, people can at least attribute something to you, like you do your stories that are very objective, they are very fair, they are balanced, they know that all sorts of things. But I think in this, I don't know to pick on what Julie said, there's also a risk of branding being compromised, because at the end of it, we need to serve the interests of the public. So it's not the matter of this particular media house appearing to be pampering this particular divide. And I'll give you a good example. After the nullification of the August 8th presidential election, an MP, I think it's David Gikari of Nakuru East, together with Manyara, there was an audio where Gikaria said that they don't need the media, and he actually singled out that all media is fake, apart from one radio station, which is vernacular, in his, I think one radio station. And the police only went for Manyara because Manyara had uttered something that they called that it was inflammatory. They forgot that particular risk. We saw Siaya Senator calling out one media house. Nothing happened. So when we have leaders that go pronouncing such utterances, what makes it difficult for their foot soldiers now to to implement what they are saying. And that is the reason why the media, we are increasingly becoming targets or soft targets for attack from this particular, because they hear. The president himself is on record. He has, I think we can call a very low opinion towards the media, and he keeps on saying that. When he started admonishing the judiciary, he said the judiciary with the media. Now, what makes you think if you walk into their supporters' territory, they'll give you that respect? We have had even instances where we had Raila Odinga at some point pointed at one media house and said, there's a media that is attacking me, and he was pointing to one. Then you think that you'll easily walk into that environment and come out unscathed. So it's very difficult on how we are. Yes.
Okay, and Julie, maybe as we wind up on this and move on to something else, does the risk for female journalists increase, given we are talking generally about journalists now, but now you also have female journalists, and I mean, some of the coverage that they need to go and do are places where they may go and spend nights. It may be environments where you possibly don't have the comfort of your home or even hotels. I mean, you're literally exposed. Does that make it even a little bit more risky for female journalists?
I think it does. It makes it much more risky. For example, Jane Gaturi, I think of NTV, was actually slapped.
Yes, she was slapped, yes.
And we haven't heard much, I don't think, about her. We've heard a lot about Gashiri. That's one part of it. She was actually slapped by a guy, and that's an assault, right? We could call that a gender-based type of assault, if you want to call it that. And you can see the coverage. So the one problem is, how do people cover issues when women are assaulted in the course of duty? Another thing is, women always face the added threat of sexual violence. I know men face it too. Why are you laughing, Hayamba? It is actually the truth. We discuss this in groups all the time. There's always an added risk for a woman. You can't, for example, venture out and go and do a story at 10 o'clock if you're an all-female crew or something like that. You'd always need to think about your safety, perhaps a bit more than a man's. So I think the risk is greater, but at the end of the day, we are all journalists and we should all be protected. And like you were talking about before, it's wisdom about your own personal safety. It's the state machinery ensuring that you're protected. It's emotional intelligence when you go into these situations where it could easily turn volatile. And then it's also a growth curve for journalists, I guess, at this time, because even in media houses, people are divided. People have political biases. But you're going into situations where people have an opposing view. So you grow and you learn how to tolerate, communicate, and take conversations forward.
All right.
Yeah.
I want
just
to
add one thing, that just as a caution, because I'm a trained safety trainer for journalists. Okay. And one of the things they say is that don't be too familiar with your sources. Yeah. I mean, some of our journalists will become too familiar with our sources, with the crowds, to a level where we forget even where we are. So be cautious about treat everybody suspiciously as a journalist. Keep some distance with all. So just be aware that be cautious and create a distance between yourself and yourself. There's no permanent friend. Or, those people who cheat you to be friends are the same people who send those guns to you.
Just like politics, I guess.
Yeah, and once they know who you are and how you operate, then you become an easy target. All right, let's now look at election coverage, because this is where we've just come from. And of course, after the 8th of August elections, media was hugely criticized for many reasons. Victor, let's start with you on your thoughts on whether we did a better job this time and whether we were able to cover more areas. Were we able to give a more credible coverage as opposed to the 8th?
Thank you, Mike. One of the political contestants withdrew. I mean, in terms of policy and agenda, I think the focus shifted so much so that it was not about what will he do, whoever is elected, to more purely about the voter turnout.
It went down now to personalities.
Yes. So
ideology was thrown out of the window.
So we largely, and it was the situation that demanded that then, because about manifestos, they had talked about them. It was just about a month. There was nothing drastic to change within the promises. And so to that, I would say media quickly shifted and went to show would people come out to vote or not people come out to vote? That was the major debate and focus during that election, which to me, I would say that was the game of strategy at that time. There was no substance anymore in the election. It was purely, what is the strategy? Would people come, will people not come? So to me, I allow the media for having quickly shifted to focus on the game of strategy at that time. And purely we saw a lot, I mean, in terms of the strategy people are employing to either war people to come and vote or war people not to come and vote. So, but more importantly, again, the other major criticism was surely about tallying. I mean, and independent tallying by media, which quickly media had learned from, and there was a media owners initiative to be supported to do an independent joint, but which just a few days to the election collapsed for whatever reason. But one of the media houses, I think, or two, pursued, and Citizen TV managed to continue and gave. I know John Allan Namu with his African and Center is also doing something to do that. So again, now they showed. So that was independent. The only now people are discussing is I mean, if the independent tallying was largely dependent on information from IBC, because that was the law, and that was, were we expecting any differences? Because what the independent tallying and what I saw Citizen, and I'm saying that they were analyzing from 34 B's and A's, which is largely what IBC was doing. So why are we going to see any difference? No, that's now the current thing people are debating. But I think that was a good lesson, and we need to invest in it jointly as media going forward, that before the elections and this many by-elections from March next year, we could do, because that was a good initiative.
All right, Duncan, and you've covered elections severally. What is so difficult, because I know that's what many Kenyans would probably wonder, what is so difficult in journalists or media houses, for that matter, investing and literally having their own tally? Because some of the criticism that you'll see on social media against us as media houses is that we're out looking for violence. And I think we're accused of that wherever there's a spate of violence, the journalists will quickly run to where the violence is and forget the main thing, which is the voting and tallying and all that. So what happens in that environment that we're not able to literally have somebody there with pen and paper, if that's what it needs, or a camera, and literally just take those tallies, such that when IEBC is running their tallies, we also have our own?
Well, there's that unwritten rule in journalism or the media that if it bleeds, it leads. So that explains why where there's violence, that's
you run that way.
Or the rest. But I think the financial implications, and I think one, the cost, and of course commercial interests. Truth be told, these media houses have owners. Owners have set them up for commercial purposes. Clearly, it's a matter of you knowing how your bread is buttered, because these are private entities. And remember that we are under a regime that has already starved the media of revenue. They've cut advertising, so everybody's cautious. But you can imagine with the elephant in the room that now we are dealing with is what we call Form 34A, because that means for us to get it clear, we have to have 40,883 as of now. Those are the gazetted polling stations as per IBC. There's bone of contention on how, when the chairman said that 3.5 million people voted between 6 in the morning until 4:59. No, until 3:59. Yes. Until 3:59. Then there was that window of 4 million people within 1 hour. People are busy doing calculations on how, the rate at which perhaps what number of people are voting per second. So that basically means what Bure is saying, that largely what we are working on is Form 34B, which is actually generated by none other than IBC, which means even sending people out to the constituency is 290 constituencies was not enough, because you'll have to rely on that. And now people are asking, how sure are we that that is what was generated under Form 34A? So which means if the media is to get it right, it has to employ a strategy whereby you cover at least a bulk, maybe more than half of the 40,883 polling stations, so that in every polling station, at least you have what you can call first-hand information. During the, I must confess, during the August 8th, we could see initially, you walk into, there were actually six elections that were being conducted. So you walk into a room and already people have signed against. So they're only waiting for figures to be queued in. So you can imagine you've already appended your signature, then maybe the presiding officer or the deputy presiding officer cheekily changes the...
Or puts his own figure.
Yes, and you've already, and you know, the POs were saying because time is of the essence, we need to relay these results very fast. So agents have already been told, just sign, sign. So you find, and I asked one, actually, I think it was in Busia, I asked one, why is this one, so when I had already given instructions to my camera person that I'll be able to talk about this from, they pulled it away. But you see, now you cannot come and say this is what was happening because truth be told, that was a blank sheet. So it is very difficult for the media to play that critical role of it as a watchdog to that particular aspect because I really don't know it because of the heavy financial implications. But if there is goodwill, and I'm not saying this one in the near future, maybe something that might happen in 2042 because I don't see it happening in 2022, 2027 or 2032. But maybe in the long run, if we have to get it right, if at all we can have what Bure was saying that the media, they were to pull, but that didn't happen. If we can have, and then we say we are not going to rely at the constituencies, but we go at the polling stations, perhaps that is when we can, one way or the other, maybe vindicate what the poll agency gives, or maybe disapprove what they are saying.
And support is there. It's just the media to come together and agree on a joint media tallying because they were going to be supported. There was a budget of 150 million that had been approved to support.
What happened?
But it's purely, again, individual interests within the the media, because even in the media ourselves, we are also those parties.
Was there any political pressure at all?
There was no political pressure.
If we were to break it down, would we say that it was purely financial interest that maybe stole the day?
No.
People wanted to keep money in their pocket, or what is it that made this? Because if there was funding, then what is the problem?
That's what I'm saying, that the thing you have mentioned here, and I've seen in Central Africa, where media houses come together, the development partners will support, just like they support independent observers and the rest, because they just give budgets and they're supported. So media, if it's credible and comes as one team, and there were already people willing to support them.
But Bire, you're not telling us what went wrong.
That's what I'm saying. That's the way we are talking here. There are also people who are looking at that election either to support or boycott, because these media houses are also owned by individuals, and they are individual interests.
So there's political interests that's coming.
So there are also
commercial interests.
I don't want to be seen to be. So there are also individual decisions by media and media owners and editors. Do we want to boycott the election? Do we want to support the election?
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, go on. No, I was going to say now, as we wrap up, Julie, your wrapping thoughts and possibly what we should expect moving forward. Of course,
very interested in what went wrong.
In what went wrong. Maybe as Duncan Kayemba says in 2040, which is really a long time, do you see that as a time where we'll get it right, or do we have hope of maybe, I don't know whether we'll have another election, we don't know yet.
We might have a third one. That would be really historic. But like Duncan is saying, 40,000 polling stations, that's 40,000 people. Or you're trying to say that's 40,000 people that you're going to send to stand at each station. Or is it center?
Yes, it's polling
stations.
The gazetted polling stations.
Yes, and look and make sure that they know what's going on. That's a huge human resource outlay, and that's very expensive. So you might be right that it might take us a while to get to that point. Maybe when it comes to election time, we can hire people who are not necessarily, who don't work for us all the time, but we've hired them for that period. That might be a way to get our facts straight. But I think what happened on 8th and 26th from the media was more or less the same. The main difference was, what I think was the main difference was that the media focused also on who was voting and who was not, and that's where the battle was. So for a lot of the country, just looking at media pictures, even though people have come up with what they're calling queue theory, where they mean that even though the queue is long or short, those people voted, whether you say so or not. I think many people were able to see exactly in which areas people are voting and in which areas people were not voting, and that was the point of contention on the 26th.
All right.
So I think for that, in that capacity, we did a good job.
But the other thing, Mike, I know you are wrapping up, the investment. If media houses bought choppers, if media houses hired choppers, that's a huge expense. Media house, if you look at the budgets they spent on this election, was purely technology-based. Yeah. What 40,000 people across, we have 66 TV stations, 139 radio stations, and how many? So if those people were to pull together, 40,000, they share the bills.
Yeah. Because,
I mean,
so
it's just an issue of investing.
And actually, I think it's possible because you can bring it down, say not having polling stations, but a polling center. Remember, a polling center can have several polling stations.
Yes.
So they are about 24,000. So it's possible if the media would have had that goodwill, then perhaps it could have worked.
Right,
Also, when
the
man from the media council says there was already money
for that. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Julie Masiga, Duncan Kayemba, and Victor Buire for the newsroom. And that's where we wind up newsroom. But Morning Express is still on, so do stay with us. We'll take a short break. We'll come back with more stories that are making headlines.